physics, Newtonian physics. And you will not find those terms in this document. At least I don't remember seeing them. They certainly give no explanation. They do claim, as you indicate, that the top part of the building, above where the planes hit, fell on the lower part, and somehow that caused the lower part, in the case of the North Tower, about 95 floors, to collapse at virtually free fall speed. In other words, the top part of the building fell through the lower part as if the lower part weren't there. And like you said with the car and truck analogy, we all know that can't happen. You can't run into the back of a big semi with your little sports car and start pushing that semi at the same speed you were going down the freeway. So conservation of energy, conservation of momentum says that absolutely cannot happen. Even if you could move the semi, you wouldn't move it at that speed. There would have to be an adjustment. So even if their scenario is correct, even if it were possible that the top part could have crashed through the lower part, there would have been delay at every floor. And that couldn't happen given a collapse in what they admit for the South Tower was 10 seconds.
This is a basic ridicule, and it makes a mockery of one of the most basic laws of science that we live by every day. This hasn't raised an eyebrow somewhere?
Well, it's very strange. You've got journalists such as Alexander Coburn and George Monbiot, you know, left-wing journalists who are usually on the same side of issues as we are, who on this issue just pass over this enchanted boundary where they seem unable to be able to think rationally or empirically. I saw Greg Palast do a similar thing on your show recently. They accuse us in the 9/11 Truth Movement of being nuts who engage in magical thinking. And yet there's nothing more magical than to believe that fire and externally induced damage could cause steel-framed high-rise buildings to come down vertically and at virtually free-fall speed.
The Popular Mechanics article, which was aimed at debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories or alternative theories to the official story, has quite a few facets to it. They did some successful debunking when they talked about some wild theories that had been thrown out earlier, and they used that to essentially discredit the entire 9/11 movement, including those who were part of a very respectable science community worldwide. What do you think are the most egregious errors in the Popular Mechanics article and book?
Well, we would need several hours just to talk about their most egregious errors.
A couple of your favorites.
But one of my favorites is their attempt to deal with the existence of molten metal under the World Trade Center. So first of all, they follow NIST in trying to deny this. And NIST does not deal with it. And in a public presentation, one of their chief authors, John Gross, denied to the audience that anybody credible had testified to the existence of molten metal. And yet Peter Tully, the president of Peter Tully Construction, who was involved in the cleanup, said there were rivers or pools of molten metal under the buildings, in the rubble. Marc Loiseau, the head of Controlled Demolition, said the same thing. People with PhDs went through there, testified to the same thing. Firefighter said, you know, it was like molten lava under there. So there's no doubt about it, and yet their theory won't handle it because NIST understands that fire could not have possibly melted steel or come anywhere close to melting steel. So they have to deny it, but then they say, well, okay, let's say that there was some under there. It could better be explained by combustion within the pile, within the rubble pile. And that really appealed to Popular Mechanics, so they jumped on that and they said, well, you know, the fact that the steel under the rubble was protected from the atmosphere, it meant none of the heat could escape. So it got hotter and hotter and hotter. And they actually said this, it could have easily gotten up to the melting point of steel. So again, if you remember your high school physics, you remember that hydrocarbon fires require oxygen. And yet these guys argue that the lack of oxygen caused the fire to get hotter rather than being extinguished.
I know when I break out my welding torches, I have to add oxygen to acetylene, and acetylene is quite a bit more volatile than kerosene. The way that NIST was able to justify their findings was by using computer models. They had a range of computer models, and according to your book, they threw out the models which did not cause a collapse, and the models which they kept were completely disconnected from the findings that they had found.
They've got some genuine scientists working for NIST, and they put out some honest reports. And they reported that they found no steel columns that had been heated up to temperatures above 250 degrees Celsius. And yet NIST argues that the core columns got up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. So they multiplied their empirical finding by 4 because that's what their computer model required. And they said, well, we didn't generalize from the pieces of steel that we had because there were so few of them that we didn't think we could generalize from them. Of course, there were so few of them because the city and federal officials had them all hauled away before they could be examined. But be that as it may, their own research does not even come close to supporting the conclusions in their final report.
The UL stress test really alarmed me, and UL said at first that there were no stress tests. They didn't test steel, but they did test the mechanism, which is in effect testing steel. However, I was reading that one test basically stressed steel of the same caliber as the columns to twice what could have possibly come down with the fall of the top portion of the building. These tests didn't alter the results either. What more can you tell us about that?
Kevin Ryan, who used to work for Underwriters Laboratories before he got fired for speaking out about NIST lies, has documented all this in an article that he published in the book that Peter Dale Scott and I put out called 9/11 and American Empire.